We're starting this seminar I'm very proud and thankful for Alexey Leonidovich Kudrin to come and talk before the school, before this seminar. We know who Mr. Kudrin is. We believe that he's one of our most prominent statesmen. We have some very good prototypes, such as Speransky and contemporary experts. We have had many experts here before. Yegor Timorovich Gaidar came to us twice a year, and I think that Alexey Leonidovich introduces into our seminars these humanitarian dimension and humanistic dimension. I'm thankful to him, and we regard with great moment, and we ascribe great importance to our cooperation with the Committee of Civic Initiatives. 30 minutes for your presentation, and then questions and answers, if you will. Dear friends, dear colleagues, I'm very glad to be here at the opening of the new cycle of the Moscow School. I do hope that you will enjoy these 4 days, for you to emerge from these seminars with new insights, opportunities and abilities. At every important event, especially in education process, in discussions, there always comes a thought of what is to be done next. We are always glad we're finding something new. What we would like to do is to make some discoveries in the course of our seminars. But I would like to make 2 comments. When we speak about civic education and about the things that every person must know, I remember some beginnings, the origins of free education dating back to the classical times, when a free person in ancient Greece, for instance, got some education. So a free person had to obtain education in 2 ways. Every adult, every free Athenian had to know 3 subjects: rhetorics, grammar, and logics. These 3 things must have helped every citizen of a classical republic to defend and substantiate their rights. This was indeed the cornerstone of such education: rhetorics, grammar, and logics, to be able to defend yourself. And trivium was the name of this course. Then the quadrum, the 4 natural sciences, which had to come to the fore, and the adults had to master these. I'm the Dean of the Department of Liberal Arts of the St. Petersburg State University. I'm often asked, what are the free and liberal arts? The liberal arts is what we call, from say other languages, when we go to the Latin languages, is this trivium, the liberal arts of rhetoric, grammar, and logic. We add up, of course, liberal arts and sciences, because every person who graduates from our department comes out not just with the ability to maintain a free discussion and to be able to stand your ground. This is a very special art to be able to try and defend your opinion in a proper and well substantiated way. And this is, I think, a most important capacity for every human, to be able to express oneself freely without looking back to the authorities. So I shall gladly take your questions as a practical application of what I have just said. These principles are well studied in major universities of the world. Education starts with critical thinking, and it starts with, as I said, standing your ground in science and in arts. So apart from what we do here and within the Committee of Civic Initiatives, my major work, as I see it today, is to introduce into Russia this forgotten trivium of the liberal arts. And yet again, liberal arts, not so much that this is the art of drawing, and the liberal is not in the political jargon, but the liberal arts in the lofty original sense of this term, whereby we're saying that we have to master these very important capacities of the human mind. I'm sorry for taking up your time with this, but in my department, 70% of students choose what they want to learn. And in the first 2 years, you don't have to specialize. You're not being made a mathematician, an economist, or an art historian. No, for 2 years, you have the right to pick up what is interesting to you. And you can have meetings with the best professors to see what is of importance to you. But without the students not being too much distracted, we are having a tutor step after step. We are having something to advise. We can advise our students to select the subjects that they like, and indeed such an interest is higher with those students who have the freedom to select their subjects. So we also have the debates and the discussions, and after the profession of, say, an economist or an art historian has been chosen, your motivation is becoming a lot higher. So when I talk to the presidents of other universities, my colleagues tell us that you have to have a lot of courses on, say, accounting or statistics or mathematics in the very first year. But my perception is that our students start from relatively little things, but then they motivate each other. And I think that they can make better choices in life in the subsequent years. And this is indeed how most Western universities work. Liberal arts. Of the 21 leading universities of the world, the top 20 by all ratings, 18 of these have the programs of liberal arts, and my department is indeed such an experimental ground, the first in the line in the Russian society. we have always had and employed widely this technique of seminars, and so much so for the education. And the second thing, I just heard that we simplify, saying that this society have, say, 85% of conservatives or retrogrades, and 15% of those who are proponents of the reform. So in other words, 85% are those who support Mr. Putin and the existing political course with the campaign in the Ukraine, limitations in the mass media, limitations and the propaganda, which indeed champions only one viewpoint. So this 85% is viewed as such a percentage, and everybody else. I think that such a division is quite simplified. It's simplistic. And simplistic as it is, it has become symbolic to us. But let us try to think, what is this 85%? 85% are those people who answer one or several questions in the poll. Who will you vote for today? In conditions when we have not even come close to the electoral campaign, and when we don't even have enough freedom for the political parties, when we do not have when we have some external threats and some very serious objective tendencies of the Russian nationalism, which have not been artificially inflated, but indeed exist within the society, and the government is indeed availing itself of these moments. And when these circumstances come together, you end up with this 85%. But when you try to consider this 85% in greater detail with respect to what people think about war and peace, nationalism and internationalism, I think that this mosaic would be infinitely more complex. So I would stand free of using such somewhat artificial divisions of the Russian society into percentage categories such as 85 or 15. So I think that there are more and deeper differences between people with respect to the problems which are in front of us today. So I would not advocate such a division. Now, I would like to say a couple of words about the economic challenges before Russia today. So, to end up with my previous statement, if we look for our supporters or allies in some very, very narrow categories. Let us say take the question of nationalism and the ensuing conclusions. Nationalism is A, B, and C, whereby one people or nation has more rights or influence on the social life, the limitations of other. So when if we were to ask the question like this, then we would have a very different split in the society, and I think that we would have had a very different division if we were to consider the question about the external threats and the relations with, say, NATO and some threats. We would have had yet another, a different split if we were to talk about the Ukraine and what should be the way of compromise, how to stabilize the situation. So if we had to segregate the opinions of the society or the members of the society on these very different issues, we would have had very different splits percentage-wise. So I would certainly ask you to reserve and to refrain, to be I cautious when making such divisions in percentage terms. Russia. Now I pass to my second topic. Russia is in an economic crisis. We are entering a full-scale economic crisis. Not many of people may agree with this, because not all processes are so negative. However, even with having a little bit of a positive growth in January, a little above zero, but I think that this year, and our forecast is such, and the leading economists today say that we can see a downturn by 4.5%. The official prognosis is 3% for negative growth, but the major international institutions give it between 3.5 to 4.5%. Some of the investment banks in the West predict almost a 6% negative growth. But why today, when unlike 2008 and 2009, when the whole world was going into recession, and for many years of the depression, of the Great Depression, the world had a negative growth, and even the growth in China did not cover the negative tendencies in the rest of the world. And even though, as I said, China was growing, this did not help. Today, we're having 3% growth in the United States, in Europe. Europe will have a small growth, about 1%, but still. But Russia is falling. There are several reasons for this. Let me start with the most conspicuous reason. Oil prices go down, economic growth goes down in Russia. This is number one cause. Then, indeed, the question is, why are we so dependent on the oil prices? Shall we always be so much dependent on the oil price? Our main task is to dissociate ourselves from this trend. By 2014 and 2015, Russia has become even more dependent on the oil price than, say, previously. In the crisis of 2008, our budget balanced at about $65, and now our balance for the budget is at $102 per barrel of oil. So we have allowed ourselves to spend more, and the liabilities that we have assumed, paying, raising the pensions, building roads, and expanding the defense potential, we have become even more dependent. And when the economy indeed gets accommodated and well adapted to such high oil prices, then when the oil prices fall, the investments also fall, and other expenses have to be curtailed. say, educational, healthcare expenses go down this year, and I think that defense is the only sphere which is still growing. Some social benefits will continue to grow, but some of the major expenses are being curtailed. So, which is something that we may call a pro-cyclic mechanism. We start to add up the monies from the oil and gas revenues because the mineral rent is a temporary money, and when the price goes down and when you want when one expects to introduce more money, but the reserves are only good to sustain for about 3 years. Excuse me, 3 years. For this reason, first of all, through the budget system, then through the oil companies, which increase their investment during the peak period, and then they lower the investment. So eventually we find ourselves in this situation of dependence. Many people ask a question, well, what should have been done? Maybe these resources and these means must have been taken out and used for developing other industries. Well, this is of course very surprising that there are scientists who believe that this should be the case, but they really do not take into account the crediting policies. If we were to understand, we live in the ruble zone. We receive salaries in rubles, and if you want to come into Russia, you have to have rubles. We cannot pay with dollars or with euros. Yes, you can keep them in your banking account, or you can pay, or you can sell dollars at a stock exchange. You can buy rubles, and then you can spend your rubles, paying salaries and doing other things. But you cannot invest dollars. No company may invest dollars into the Russian economy. You have to exchange your currency for rubles. So, even if you have stipulated dollars, you have to exchange with rubles. And when we say that let us indeed build factories, we need not dollars but rubles. But here are our rubles. The rubles are by the central bank. Let us print these rubles and build these factories. But when we start emitting these rubles, the inflation goes up, because the amount of rubles in circulation is no more than is in the bloodstream of the economy. And if you emit more rubles, if you print more currency, you raise the inflation. So there has to be to increase the ruble mass, you have to make it so that those rubles which are already in the economy, they must be indeed taken or introduced or channeled into investment projects. The more production, the more demand for money, the more money you can print. So eventually you have to start with the increasing the business activity, and only then you can increase the ruble mass. Well, unfortunately in life this is not true. This does not happen in such a subsequent way. But this is not yet the most important and difficult thing. The rubles which come into the Russian economy, they have several properties. Circulation, speed of circulation, the less circulation, the higher circulation, the less inflation. And there is one more important point, the savings. There is such an institution as a bank. And the banks are like carriers of our currency. But the point is that the banks have a normative. They can only take about 10 times more than the share capital. So per every unit of capital, 10 units of deposit can be taken and 10 units of loan can be dispatched. So what happens in this case is when the banks start to credit each other, and indeed the currency multiplier starts to act in the economy, which indeed leads to multiplying the denominations. And the coefficient in other countries goes higher. So countries with good investment rating, such a number is about 6%, and in China it's 10 per every unit. And in Russia it's only 3 or 4. So the economy is then perceived as a sponge, which either soaks this money or does not take them in. So this currency multiplier increases the money for the investment. And if you are sure that the economy will grow, that the government introduces and observes a stable rules of the game, when the fiscal system is transparent, when you know that the government will not change the taxes, that the local governments will not change the local rules of the game, when all these factors add up, and when these risk factors grow, then the banks are less reluctant to give out this money, to credit this money, and there is more urge for investment. So this money may increase through 2 or 3 times. This currency multiplier is usually not analyzed by our journalists or analysts. Some of the economists deal with labor relations, some deal with innovations, but very few economists deal with the monetary and credit policies, and not many people know about the principles of such circulations. The reason why I say this is that to be able to invest and to create something in Russia and to foster the investment in Russia, there has to be good investment climate, and we don't have to have many dollars when you think about this. If you take the pre-crisis time, even going back to 2009, if I were to ask what were the investments into the main assets of Russia? Trillion, 5 trillion, 12 trillion, or 13.5 trillion. The investments into the main assets. This is about the size of the federal budget of this country, and this embraced all of the sources. Half of all investment were realized at the expense of the enterprises themselves, and the rest was circulating in the economy. So of these, so in dollars, we had up to $400 billion in an investment, but only in ruble denomination. So when you say that let's get some $5 billion, the mechanism of the internal Russian economy was such that the rubles were going into investment, and only about 15% of all these investments were thanks to the external investment. Most of the investment were from the internal sources. So when we say that let us increase the investment into Russia and increase the production, increase the number of innovation-based enterprises, one has to think about the principles of savings. One has to think about the investment climate. In this sense, from the standpoint of its development, any country may get to very important and significant growth, but these 15% of external investment play a great role, because in the past several years these investments were more efficient. And the Western banks are a lot more rigorous in applying such principles of crediting. And those who have come to invest in Russia, they usually were quite scrupulous as to what kind of project they're getting into, what are the risks. So the inflow and outflow of capital is a very important indicator, and the investments of the foreign companies into Russia are were usually direct and mostly related to high technologies and introducing new technologies into Russia. This is indeed one of the purposes of any investment, to bring in something which is not which has not been there, which has been missing. There's a worthy question. Let us imagine that starting from 1992 through to 1999, Russia sold oil and gas for $200 billion. And from 2000 through to 2011, Russia sold $2 trillion worth of oil and gas. So when there is more hard currency coming, indeed, who are the beneficiaries of these monies? The oil and gas companies. They give out their taxes. The taxes were high, and so the state takes this rent. In some cases, we had up to 50% of all revenues be paid as taxes. Usually, 60-70% were kept by the companies. And the rest of the monies were taken by the companies into the internal market to buy rubles. And so, but there were not many more rubles when they were selling these hard currency profits. But the dollar was becoming cheaper and cheaper. Say 30 rubles per dollar, and then 24 rubles per dollar. This was the change. What does this mean? This meant that our average salaries, which were going up, we could buy more and more imported goods, because the import was becoming cheaper, because of the dollar was getting cheaper, and the Russian citizen felt this and started to buy more goods of higher quality, foreign trips, purchase of foreign cars, purchase of computers, purchase of iPhones, purchase of other goods which, as I said, were imported. And because dollar was going down, was getting cheaper in terms of the exchange currency, import into Russia rose from $50 billion to about $350 billion. So multiple growth was observed, and the more and more hard currency is introduced into the market, and the cheaper it becomes in the internal market, the import goes higher, and it kills the internal producers, because it becomes easier to buy than to produce. This is called the Dutch disease in the economic theory, by the example of the Netherlands, when the gas deposits in the North Sea were discovered, and the Dutch were indeed quite comfortable with their spending. And one of my recent article is dedicated to the manifestations of the Dutch disease in Russia. There is an evaluation that this was not as conspicuous in Russia, but it's certainly, and that we saw that the technologies became cheaper, and many factories and plants in Russia became more efficient, because the imported technologies were more available and accessible. But today we are indeed in the epicenter of the crisis, and this year crisis is going down by 40% because of the devaluation of the ruble. So the oil prices went down, a devaluation of the ruble took place, and our companies have to buy dollars to purchase foreign-made components and details, which indeed has risen by about twofold because of the change in the currency valuation. As a result, we need more, and we have to spend more for buying computers, and our level of life went down. If we were to buy only on imported goods, then your lifestyle would have certainly gone down significantly. But what the government is doing, the government understands this, and the government understands that there is a lot of dependence on the imported goods in, say, the foodstuffs market, and the government does understand that this has affected including the sanctions that we imposed upon ourselves. The meat and fish imported in January of this year is 5 times less compared to January of last year, and because of the devaluation and the so-called anti-sanctions, the prices went up, and if you take the whole structure, they have not grown twice, but they've grown by 20 or 30%. So the government has the right now to regulate not just the retail but also the wholesale prices, which is a blow on the free market economy, which I only hope that will be used in the specific cases. But indeed, this is a blow for producers. The producers will not be allowed to sell at the price that they find adequate. And the same pertains to different fields of activities. And if you are limited in price setting, this will be, of course, a very unfavorable factor. But getting back to the issue of our dependence, the dollars taken into the market do not create added value. Indeed, they allow for expanding the import and some profit by this, but this does not lead automatically to the expansion of production or the industrial development. For this reason, one has to be very cautious about using the hard currency resources. In the peak period, some have to be invested into the reserves. And there was a general consensus by all economic ministries that the reserves need to be made. So this is this was one of the factors which certainly influences the negative growth. So the oil price, as I said, is such an important factor. Prices on oil are not bound to be high. We had a historical peak in 2010 to 2012 was the highest time for oil price throughout the observation period. If you could, in correlation, this was the previous peak. It was in 1982, 1983. This was about $100. So we already saw this $100 in 1982. Then they got down as low as 12 and 8. I do not know the laws. Probably nobody knows the laws of how it may fluctuate, how they can go down from 120 to 8 and 12. And why? We do not know all of the laws of this market. The most unpredictable value is the oil price. We do not know the regularities for the oil prices. We have not learned, nobody has learned to give the proper forecasts, to prognosticate. There can be accidental good guesses, but in the economic theory there is no regularity. I went through all of the analysis for 1998. Yes, there was some trend that the investment banks felt, but when the actual dip took place, nobody could foresee it. For this reason, we have to lower our dependency and to be more thoughtful about improving the investment climate in Russia. Let me also call two other causes of the GDP in Russia going down. This is the sanctions. Sanctions have significantly influenced in a negative way the Russian economy. The devaluation of ruble in November and December was mostly due not only to oil but also to the sanctions. And the role of the sanctions up until mid-December was higher than the oil price influence, which we can compare by the devaluation in the oil-producing countries. And of course, we know that the oil producers such as Norway, Saudi Arabia had devaluation by 10 to 15%. In Russia, the devaluation was a lot more significant. So the sanctions did play their role. In numerical values, if the oil price goes down by $20, the country will lose about $100 to $120 billion, which of course influences the exchange rate. But now imagine that we have accumulated loans which are not critical for the Russia's GDP when there are no sanctions. They're quite well manageable loans when the companies may refinance your loans. You can do it with your trade partners, you can do it with other banks. Such loans in corporate valuation had about $640 billion by the beginning of the sanction period. But now, starting from July of last year, when our major leading banks and even not only the leading banks but also other Russian banks were limited in their crediting capacities in the West. As a result, the revolving of credit and the percentage, the interest payment requires about $120 billion, which is almost commensurate with the monies lost because of the oil price fall. So indeed, at some point last year, the sanctions negative influence was even higher than that of the oil price influence, and this was a double blow on the Russian economy. So it is not just about not getting access or missing the $120 billion. When a country finds itself in a situation like Russia did today because of the sanctions, which have been introduced for political reasons, and it was said that the country, which is Russia, would be isolated in this create for the business unpredictable risks. These risks are not limited to the loans which were not provided, and the systemic risks go up. The businesses think, what happens if the SWIFT gets what happens if Russia is left without SWIFT? How do the companies? How are the companies going to be buying the components for the electronic devices, or for the how will they pay for the fertilizer? So the expectation risks arise, the factors of risk, and then the government starts saying the devaluation of ruble became was deeper than we thought. We are asking the chains and the chain retailers not to increase the prices for some goods, irrespective of the costs you incur, or else the pricing will not be based on competition and the demand in the market, but on us believing what your costs were, and such risks certainly are associated with the hard currency risks. Indeed, one of the greatest concerns of the businesses and the ordinary people is the limitations on the free movement of capital and the currency exchange. And this is a most important thing. If the free movement of capital may be limited, for right now there are no limitations for entering the Russian market, and in the same way you can take it to your country. I have to tell you that the free entry into the capital flow, free capital flow, was only initiated in Russia in 2006. Today, every citizen of Russia had the right to open a banking account in any country of the world. You have to realize that before 2006, this was not allowed. But when this freedom ensued, when you can make a choice, people do not want to part with these liberties. Some businesses are used to this system. The investments into Russia are serviced by thousands of enterprises, hundreds of banks. Sometimes it may be more advantageous to open up a banking account outside of Russia. Sometimes it is more beneficial to keep your reserves in Russia. So it really is an option of the business. But when such limitations are imposed, then the business becomes concerned, and the question really arises if these will continue. So these risk factors such costs may increase. So if the risks are not calculated, then people may and the businesses may well refrain from investing into Russia, into the Russian production. The expectations horizon gets narrower. There is this third group of problems, which is indeed the major one, not the oil price and not the sanctions, which is the non-reformed state of the Russian economy. And this is something that I'm trying to talk about within the 5-7 minutes. Can a country afford 5-7% growth? May Russia has a 5 to 7% growth? Yes, it is possible. Can a leading Russian leading economy have 3 to 4% growth? Say Germany. Yes, it is possible. Can Japan have economic growth of? And Japan had about 1% growth for the past 20 years. Japan has started on the Abe economics, when the Central Bank of Japan decided to emit currency through cheap loans equal to almost 0% of interest. And the economy still doesn't go up. It does not rise. It seemed that there were some hopes, but it did not grow. Then, of course, there was the deflation problem in Japan, which is also very difficult when the prices go down. When you want to start a production, when you hope that there will be and the prices go down, and this certainly stops the investment. So Japan had almost 10 years of lowering prices, so of deflation. So what Japan decided to do to stimulate the economy by emitting currency. The inflation did not go up, counter the expectations, but the growth did not ensue. There were some bubbles growing in the economy, but the general trend was not positive. Now, Greece wants considers staying in Eurozone, but not observing the demands of the Eurozone. And not observing the credit principles. And the new government, which was elected 2 months ago, said that it was not going to support the austerity measures which had been introduced several years earlier. So this idea of a parallel currency, to introduce it in Greece, emerged. We don't have enough money for economic growth. We need money. So when we talk about if there is enough money, we provide a loan as a bank, and we create a stimulus. But then, of course, you have to realize how you will sell your produce. How will you sell the goods that you have produced? Can you be competitive in the market? Can you sell it for a price which is economically adequate? So in this country, in Russia, when the oil prices were going up and there was more money in the economy, what we saw, that the central bank, fearful of the further stronger strengthening of ruble, was buying in the dollars and was accruing the gold and hard currency reserves. And when we say that by the beginning of the crisis of 2008 we had almost $600 billion in hard currency reserves, of which about 280 were accumulated by the government, and the rest were accumulated by the central bank. So the central bank was buying the hard currency, as I said, fearful of a strengthening of the national currency and the decrease in the internal production. So the central bank is always between the two fires, between the strengthening of the national currency, because the company said we cannot compete with the imported goods when the ruble is so strong. So one of the reasons was the cheap dollar, which allowed the companies to buy in. So the central bank tried to contain these dollars which were washing around Russia, and of course in the normal condition the deflation was not more than 3 to 5%. So we were always balancing between these two problems, and the whole world was telling the Central Bank of Russia, you should either keep the inflation low, but of course it was more proper to keep the inflation low, because the credits were cheap and more projects could be initiated. The central bank was keeping up with the high inflation and did not create conditions for good interest rates and the loans did not become cheaper, which was indeed one of the consequences of the oil price fall. Let us take the food industries, or transport, or infrastructure, or the mass communications. We could do that, but in the industry, in the heavy industry, the loans have to be longer for 3 years and at about 7 to 10 interest rate, which is about which was almost achieved before the crisis, but was not to be kept in the conditions of crisis. So getting back to the question of stimulating the economy, something that I said earlier, in this economy, in the contemporary situation, stimulating the economy will not give any effect. It is not about the access to the money, but also the production rate. We can we can build a plant and produce goods, but if by its quality it is substandard, or if it's inferior to the imported goods, it will simply not find its market. So, indeed, the oil prices will hardly be high. The demand will hardly grow. The central bank will not be buying in so much hard currency and will not be printing much more rubles. The consumer loans, which were indeed the drivers of the economic growth, I think that too much debt has been accumulated internally. So this resource is also dwindling. So what is to be done to increase your production by 5 to 7% with a demand which is not growing? This can only be done by substituting, or indeed making something that would increase the quality of the imported goods, by curbing or indeed liquidating the inefficient production. The number of enterprises with high costs must decrease, which may lead to the growth of the GDP. But what is to be done to increase the performance? It is, of course, the cost of the loans, because the cost of the loan, the credit factor is mostly important. Any analyst today, any investment analyst, if he or she is asked, give me a loan at a low interest rate and I'll provide you with first-class goods, any analyst will say, without lowering the inflation, the credit cost cannot go down. The costs associated with the administrative resources. There are so many inspections, control, and surveillance, up to 60 federal bodies of control which are acting in every subject, and every enterprise, the companies have to of course you have to realize that the inspections take place only in those fields where there is money. The too much regulation, it is extremely difficult to come to agreement and to have the licensing documentation. The infrastructure is extremely costly. Transporting, the infrastructure which is not sufficiently efficient. The transportation system needs to be reformed in terms of the railroad, the roads. So we do have very, very expensive logistics in Russia. Then there is the problem of the taxes, the insurance, the VAT, all these factors which pester the businesses in Russia add up to each other. In some cases, subsidies are needed. Subsidies for infrastructure costs, subsidies for logistics. And some advancements are only possible if the loans become more accessible. I started and enumerated some of these factors which are related to costs, but the actual state regulation is number one factor in terms of licensing, the control, and in terms of the state expenses, the actual investments on the part of the state into the infrastructure, into the transportation and logistics system. The policies with respect to the natural monopolies, and so on and so forth. If we were to analyze all these factors, then the major reforms must embrace the state investment and the structure of the state investment, which is far to be desired. With the state investment and the state costs, something needs to be changed. Let me quote an example. In 2015, all costs for education, higher education, was about 600 billion rubles, including all the laboratories. 600 billion rubles. The defense budget grew by 600 billion rubles, and with the oil prices going down, all other expense categories have to be decreased. So defense budget and the social budget are the only two spheres which cannot be cut short. Now, the civil servants, we have about the civil servants make up about 10%. So even if all civil servants have salary cuts, this would be about 10% of all the budget of all other budget employees in this country. So indeed, the salary cuts for the civil servants will in no way influence the general structure of the costs. The social benefits, the pensions are expected to grow, and with that said, the pension funds will not grow, because the pensions will grow, but the pension funds will not be going higher. So these will have to be taken from the budget. These amendments which are taken to the State Duma presume for these increases in the pensions, the social benefits to the say to the vulnerable groups of citizens will also be will also grow. So indeed, all the cuts will relate to other fields such as healthcare, education, transportation, and infrastructure development. So in general, we have a worsening of the budget situation. So while we have to improve the logistics, but it will be only becoming smaller and dwindling. So I think that within the next several years we will be seeing the infrastructure depreciating. The same pertains to the communal services. And the repair works will also be financed. So this is indeed a pro-cyclic example. The budget must, in principle, increase the demand. But in the particular case, we're seeing something quite contrary. What happened in 2008 and 2009? The state increased the investment because at that time we were a lot more prepared. And these reserves allowed us to come up with more investment. And indeed, this is why the anti-crisis system was more or less proactive, and the state increased an investment which somehow relaxed the situation in the market. Now what we're seeing is quite contrary to what happened in 2008 to 2009, because we are now dependent on the oil price. You have to cut the costs, and you cannot, one cannot survive with the reserve fund. It has to be calculated for at least 3 years. So already this year we have to cut on the costs. And when we talk about the increase in the defense budget, then it naturally leads to about 600 billion rubles were taken from the educational budget. So the structure of the state problems, the share of the state in the economy, the competition is another structural, the lack of competition is another structural problem, the relations between the federal authorities and the regional authorities, more freedom to the regions might have stimulated economic recovery if some of the fiscal revenues were to stay in the regions, and we can see on the example of how the centralized ways of spending concentrate. So we can speak about the different spectra, the entire spectrum. The pension system. Why do I come back to the pension system? I have many opponents. And this is my last statement. The number of pensioners in this country will continue to rise, and the number of taxpayers will continue to dwindle. There will be less taxpayers per number of pensioners. So what is what is the answering solution? Let us say the pension today, your salary is 50,000 rubles. You retire and your pension will be 15,000 rubles. So an elderly person goes from 50,000 to 15,000, and this correlation will be even worse. How can this proportion change? There are several ways. One is to increase the taxes. Is the country ready for increasing the taxes? If we take the 26 to 30% tax increase, already had a significant burden increase on the businesses. And indeed, the pension system, some enterprises went to the pension taxes growing even higher. So if it's not about the actual tax increase, then the pension age must be increased. And when I say that the pension age must be increased, for several reasons, including the first of all, the longevity has gone up, and retiring at 55 or 60 is a bit early. And Russia is one of the few countries with such a low pension age. But we think that the efficient age is even lower. About 52, 53 years for females. And clearly this is different for different fields of economy. So if you and the quality of life has gone up. So people by 55 or 60 generally continue to work, even though they retire nominally. So the perspective is not about keeping the pensions for those who work, but for actually having dignified pensions or adequate pensions for those who retire. Indeed, the low pension age indirectly becomes one of the causes for low pensions. For all economic criterion, I can say that it will be quite reasonable to keep to increase the pension age, and not to increase the pension age would be indeed to waste one of the few valuable economic labor resources that we have. I believe that we may have a great economic effect by increasing the pension age. This is a major, most important resource. So I just mentioned some of the structural reforms which decrease the costs, and such structural reforms are very, very highly needed. So I'm just referring to the instances of Japan and Greece that I quoted earlier. It is not about increasing the currency in the economy that can help us to fight the economic ills and challenges. Sorry for taking up more of my time, but I shall be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much. We are having this session with Alexey Kudrin for the second time in Galitsino, but we hope to continue. Yes, Alexey Kudrin. What I would like to say, and to ask you, Alexey Leonidovich, where and how did this militaristic orientation come out? And secondly, this school has had several Norwegian seminars, and we had a great pleasure. We finally, we did not recognize ourselves in Norway and recognized ourselves in places like Iran or Tunisia, but suddenly we understood that Norway developed democracy before oil was discovered. Well, I think that we're going through a very special period in the history of this country, which can be in part called militarization, but I would not say that this is the characteristic I would use. I think that these are the geopolitical problems of Russia, which in the opinion of this government must be solved. The geopolitical problems which were long neglected. One of the most important statements that I hear from the government is the NATO advancement towards Russia's frontiers and the dwindling of Russia's influence in the world. So the attempts of the present government are aimed at increasing the influence of Russia. In the past several years, this influence was strengthened, and this NATO advancement was related to the military bases, the anti-missile radar system in Europe. Unfortunately, Russia and the West did not come to an agreement on that, and NATO went further with this program without Russia. When the situation in Georgia, in the opinion of the Russian government in Georgia, with the support of the Western countries, there started an aggression against South Ossetia, and this was perceived by the Russian government as a threat to Russia. A geopolitical threat. The same pertains to the Ukraine. Association of the Ukraine with the European Union is not by itself dangerous or threatening. Yes, it impeded our relations, economic relations with the Ukraine, but it must not have led to the war. However, this was indeed the triggering factor for discussion, both in the Ukraine and in Russia. Then, after 4 years of preparation for this agreement, the Ukraine did not sign the agreement, and Russia was not involved in the discussion of this EU-Ukraine agreement, and that led to the mass protests in the Ukraine. And this indeed was the beginning of the very dramatic events led to the war in the East, which of course increase the as you said, the militaristic dimension, or the military dimension, in the Russian policies and the Russian budget. The Russian government perceives the risks as the situation when Russia is less and less taken into consideration. Yes, Russia has a nuclear parity with the West. We don't have a military parity with the West. NATO has 10 times higher fold in a tenfold higher military defense budgets. But in terms of the nuclear parity, Russia generally has a balance. No country would start a war taking into account such a nuclear containment factor. The advancement of NATO to the Russia's frontiers changes this balance. We are within such a historical process where we have to strive to keep up this balance. I think that no politician today would be willing to cancel or to abandon such balance. What we see today is some consequences. And the fact that such a conflict first evolved in Georgia and then in the Ukraine is one of the manifestations of such a geopolitical conundrum. And the Russian government perceives its task in such a way. For this reason, the military component increases. I have to say that such objectives are well understood. The answer is, but the question is how these ends are, what are the means to this end? Well, the influence of Russia is dwindling economically and politically, technically, and from the standpoint of technology development, and even in terms of the development in the defense sphere. Such a conflict can only this conflict cannot go on for say decades. Russia will not be able to cope with such a situation of conflict. I hope that we will never cross the line and have any military conflicts with the West. But we must coexist. But Russia cannot afford being in such conflict for too long. Not just in terms of money and financial resources, but also in terms of all the circumstances. We have seen that through devaluation of the national currency, and I think that I can only deplore the fact that we are paying less and less attention to the economy in conditions when such geopolitical problems came to the fore. We could say that this is a temporary situation, but what we see is that we're losing momentum, and we're losing some of the institutions, in the free market, the modernization of the Russian economy, and this indeed takes it back by down to 10 years, even if this conflict goes on for 2 or 3 years. So as I said, I'm not trying to give a definitive opinions or evaluations, but I think that this is the cost that we are paying because the Russian government has set such objectives, such tasks, and supported by the Russian society. The situation may change. But for the moment, we see how this political course is supported by the Russian population, even in spite of the economic costs incurred by the country. In conclusion, let me say that the Soviet Union was a more powerful country. It had more developed military. This was an isolated economy. The Soviet Union built its economy in terms of isolation, in the paradigm of isolation, a closed-in circuit which creates everything and all goods quite independently. For good or for today's economy does not allow for such a scenario of development. In the world today, in 2013, $1,600,000,000,000 dollars were spent for high tech and science by the 10 leading countries of the world. Russia only spent $38 billion. The world today is a major, huge laboratory, and we can only survive by exchanging and working together, developing the Russia today must think and indeed get this 350 billion rubles dollars that it is getting through the rubles through the oil and gas rent. It must get these revenues from high tech, from technology. Russia is not in a position to spend $1,600,000,000,000 to provide for this scientific development, for the R&D, and for indeed the technological advancements. So Russia must cooperate. Russia must be a part of the globalized civilizational process. And we have to sell to the outside market technologies. We have to sell knowledge. Finland creates Nokia, or creates, or say some forestry technologies. No, by the way, forestry technologies is becoming, alongside with the higher education, new sizable fields of the Finnish economy. So we cannot be isolated. We are bound to be a partner with the world. We are bound for integration. All processes which lead and curtail and decrease such integration arrest Russia's development. So we believe that we shall overcome this crisis, this political crisis, and that we shall go back to the cooperation with the outside world. Indeed, the rhetoric, the anti-Western rhetoric of today is indeed my major concern in this country, in Russia, because by serving the immediate geopolitical concerns, we may indeed have such a deal, such a terrible blow to the relations with our partner that it will take such a long time to increase our time, and we will take too much time to repair. We only have 5 minutes for for questions. Thank you very much, Alexey Leonidovich, for coming to participate in this seminar. And let me thank the foundation. My question is, why did we never speak about corruption? Of course, let me ask a question. What role does greed play in today's Russia? Because we know the history of Crimea, and we know that in 1994 Crimea wanted to become a part, and why there is so much concentration on these events. Do you believe that greed is an important factor? Well, I think that you have united several questions into one. Let me speak about corruption. I spoke about the institutional reforms which are needed in Russia today. The development of the private property institution, the state regulation, the portion and the state regulation is institution. Corruption is a crime. Corruption is associated usually with the state institutions, with the state bodies, even though corruption may spill into the private businesses. Corruption in Russia is a monstrous problem, mainly due to the insufficient development of other institutions. I may have already said that political competition creates a foreign mechanism whereby any predecessor and preceding government would be put in check and analyzed and criticized. This is indeed one of the significant containing factors for the governments. The principle of elected officials presupposes scrutiny on the activities of the previous government. We know that in many countries the president and the prime minister may even fall under investigation. We saw that with Chancellor Kohl, with Prime Minister Berlusconi, with President Sarkozy, even with Prime Minister Blair. Scrutiny on the previous government. And this is an important, most important mechanism when every government must understand that it will come before the judgment of the society. So these are the ethical principles alongside with the political momentum. Say if the British Prime Minister a British minister retires, or if he or she drives and uses the governmental resources for personal gain. The same might happen in France or in other Western countries. I think that the fighters against corruption must take into account the best practices. So it is about practice. It is such practices exist in Asia, in Europe, in America. There are anti-corruption practices in countries with even more authoritarian regimes than that in Russia. I'm more than sure that corruption may be successfully contained, and this indeed deals with the development of institutions, including the freedom of speech. One brief question. Artyom? Yeah. Artyom Filatov from St. Petersburg. When the sanctions were imposed on Russia, one of the motives was to change the policies of the Russian government in Crimea and in the Ukraine. We saw that the Russian political circles acted quite contrary to that, and where may it take our economy to? Shall we be hungry? May it take us to the status of Zimbabwe, North Korea, or the late Soviet Union? How much worse may it become? Sanctions do affect Russia, and there are sanctions which may still be introduced, which will affect Russia even worse. The GDP may go down by 2 to 3%, in addition to what has already been foreseen, which indeed may lead to the general deterioration of the economic situation in Russia. I think that all people with common sense understand perfectly well that there is a line which will be painful to cross. There can be things which no government would be able to survive. Clearly, that that the Western countries do not also think that they can go to and cross every line. I don't think that such extreme measures will be enforced because they may cause other destabilizing factors to come into action. And I think that the situation will become less and less controllable. This is already a serious factor of instability for Europe, for America, for Asia, and of course for Russia. So of course nobody is interested in further deterioration and the further urgent of the geopolitical risks. I think that every party seems to calculate the effects and the consequences, and I think that the Russian government understands that the price to be paid cannot go higher and higher. I think that the Minsk agreement too is an adequate compromise which was achieved with the immediate participation of Russia. There is some concern about the Minsk agreement too, but I think that both Russia and the world will have much greater risks if the Minsk agreements too are found to be non-executable. Of course, the West has many measures to enforce, but the situation in the world will become even less controllable. And I think that the Western governments are fully conscious of that. So I think, and I do hope, that we shall all avoid the scenario of Zimbabwe or even Venezuela. And in terms of the real-time development trends for the Russian economy, any Russian government of today or in 5 or 10 years will try to mobilize Russia's ability in the world economy. Because indeed we cannot set a goal that we shall leave worse and worse, but we shall defend ourselves. But this is, of course, I'm an oversimplification, but we don't want to be like such countries. Difference, Alexey Leonidovich. If we may keep the standing order and the program, and we indeed we shall have our questions for Alexey Leonidovich. Let me say on my behalf that this was a most interesting beginning session for this seminar, which will last for 4 days, and I think that Alexey Leonidovich said 2 very important things. What Mr. Kudrin has said are the statements which and the way he set the way for this seminar, for the thoughtful and valuable arguments. We do have these arguments and we shall use them. And the matter of rhetoric, it is not only important what we say, but also how we say. And I think that the form and content must be united. In this seminar of the Moscow School, we shall remember that rhetoric is of great importance. Let me thank our expert with a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. We shall meet on Friday evening, and I shall be answering your questions.